Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Ripley episode 7. It's called Macabre Entertainment. So spoilers for the episode. And this is the penultimate episode of the season. Lots of things falling out from the investigation that was going on last episode. We get kind of a nice contrast to that scene where the inspector, was his name, Ravini, talked to Ripley with this episode because he talks to Marge, and it's kind of interesting comparing and contrasting those two different conversations and how they work. Especially since by the time he talks to her a second time in this episode, she's even kind of under suspicion because some of the lies are making it look like she's lying about something, even though it's just Ripley's lie that's been regurgitated from her mouth. I think that's quite interesting. I do think there's some great sort of bookend stuff here with Ripley. It's the sort of thing we've been playing with already in the show, this idea that we sort of really focus on the details of the things that he wants, this lavish lifestyle, and it emphasizes that and then emphasizes it further when he loses it and when it all kind of comes crashing down and he's left to like retreat from a nice hotel once again to a crappy little hotel where you can hear shouting, where the light switch doesn't work, and all that stuff. But I will say, as an episode of the show as a whole, this one definitely doesn't feel as strong as probably most of the others. Mainly just because it's a lot more, like, there's a lot of little things happening in this episode, and it makes some big strides by the end, but it doesn't have that sort of central, like, super laser focus that some of the great episodes of this show has had. This is more about dealing with a lot of loose ends and sort of making a lot of callbacks to things that he's going through. We once again get a scene of him in a bank and questioning, like, can he go over and like fix this mix up with the check, right? He gets a letter this episode that they believe the signature on the last check was fraudulent and they want him to come in and show ID and put a new signature down for the records. And he goes in to do that, and he kind of hesitates. We get a very similar scene again where he's looking over at the guards, he's looking at the people, you know, the bank employees sitting at the table, he's thinking about going and sitting down, but he kind of knows that once he sits down and tries to do this, if it doesn't work, if they don't believe him, then that is it. It's done. So he ends up chickening out and retreating to just trying to fix it by a letter, which I don't think is going to work, but he tries to. And, you know, little things like he notices the photograph that he's put in the fake passport starting to kind of come off at the edges. Just little things like that make him kind of scared. It's kind of a visual representation of what's going on right now, is that the entire fake life that he's built for him is starting to, you know, fray at the edges. It's not working anymore. There's a lot of teasing in this episode. Again, like I said, going back to Marge with her and the inspector meeting again, and they do a good job of like repeating motifs, and like, you know where he is and where he's about to go because he's making that climb up all those stairs that they really emphasize with Tom way back in the first few episodes, and they do it a second time this episode with the other policeman that comes to pick her up. But yeah, which by the way, the inspector's a bit of a dick to Marge in that he drags her out against her will all the way to Rome and then doesn't give her a lift back. It says, you'll have to take the train and the bus, and really emphasizes it to really, and I think that maybe further reflects that he's got suspicions about her based on the lies that have kind of wrapped around her because of Ripley, because at the core of all this, someone is not who they say they are, but he doesn't know that, and she doesn't know that he's pretending to be Dickie yet either, which makes a lot of the moments in the conversation really entertaining. It's maybe, you know, I've been forgetting to always do my favorite scene of the week, but I'll just say it now. My favorite scene of the week is probably the first time the inspector and Marge talk in this episode, where he comes to her place. There's a lot of little things here I love. I think my favorite detail even of this entire episode is that while he's at Margie's place, he sees a painting that the real Dickie did, and he's sort of like looking at it as if, oh, that's shit. I kind of love the idea that well, at least one of, if not the thing that gives it away that Ripley isn't who he says he is that he's actually much better at something than Dickie is. I think that's wonderfully ironic, because so much of this is about stealing someone's life to have a better life, to have better things, to aspire to be better and greater, and feel like you're a part of that higher society, where you won't be made fun of your fashion choices, where you feel like you belong. Like, so much of this is, as I've said throughout the show, is him being ashamed of what he actually is, and he wants to achieve what someone else is. So the irony that he's cut out because he's actually genuinely good at something better than the person whose life he stole, I actually think is a wonderful ironic detail. Not that the inspector figures it out from that, but he was looking at it, and it's something that maybe he thinks back to the painting that was sitting in the apartment when he was talking to Ripley last episode. Maybe he's thinking something's not quite right there. Or maybe he's thinking, oh, he's gotten a lot better since he was here. In a short span of time, he got a lot better at painting. But no, I love this conversation because when he brings up Ripley, or she brings up Ripley, his eyes light up. Like, but you saw Ripley recently? And she's like, yeah, I saw him in Rome last Wednesday. Dickie wasn't there, but he was. And like his eyes light up because, you know, I think at this point she's not even aware that Tom's considered missing, that he's possibly another another victim, I mean to say. So he's like, oh, where did you see him? And it sends him on a bit of a goose chase. And it's because he doesn't find any evidence of Ripley being around that he starts to think of, maybe not suspicions about Marge, maybe that's not quite the right term, but at the very least starts to treat her more hostile as a detective, and says she can't leave the country. But I enjoyed this part because at any point, like, the right question, he doesn't know to ask it, right? He never once says, describe what he looks like, right? And that would be very on the nose, but there's very specific questions that might start to unravel what the real lie is here, but neither of them know. But they both know something's up. They've both got suspicions. I think what I love about this as well, actually, is that Marge has been suspicious of Ripley since the day she met him, since episode 1, episode 2. She's had her suspicions. And now obviously this detective has his suspicions of Ripley. He just doesn't know it's Ripley. And I love that they're finally meeting and their suspicions aren't lining up. They're clashing against each other. It's not quite fitting together. And there's just, there is definitely just one statement or one question and answer that would start to unravel it if they started to think about the right details, if they started to think about like how this mix-up has happened, or even the camera makes a point of showing that there's a photograph of Dickie on the table. If at any point he looked down at this photograph and said, who is that? She'd be like, what do you mean, who is that? You said you spoke to Dickie last week. All starts to unravel, right? There's just the simple things like that would just completely take the whole thing apart. And that's part of the fun. It's all these plates spinning, and it feels like Ripley's world is unraveling, this fake world that he's built. And this is just one element of it that could completely come crashing down. The other side, of course, is the bank, which is also coming after him in this episode. We get that sort of face-to-face, kind of like interview-style version of reading the letter again, where the bank managers or lawyers like talk to him and say, we've had to, put this in as fraud. You have to clear this up. So he tries to fix it with a letter. I don't think that's going to work. I think that's a desperate ploy to try and maintain what you still got. I did love one of the details in the episode, though, which is that when he goes to the hotel in Palermo, I want to say, he pulls out Dickie's pen, right? The concierge offers him a pen. He's like, no, I've got my own. And he pulls out the fancy pen that he's all proud of, the one that he got from Dickie. And the concierge is like, oh, very nice, sir. It's very American Psycho with a business card. He's like, oh, very nice, yes. But I like that because later on in the episode, when he's at the shittier hotel and there's no bag boy, even though the bag boy never comes at the first hotel, he says, oh, I'll just do it myself. There's like an awkward wait for the bag boy to show up. It never quite happens. I should say bellboy, but whatever. Bag boy, bellboy, yeah. But he, there's this moment where he's at the desk and he's asking for a letter, and there's a running thing with this concierge at this shittier hotel where he doesn't really know where anything is. He's very unorganized. We return to this same shot of him getting back into the office. It's the exact same angle every time of him rummaging through all of his like papers on his desk looking for, at one point it's stamps for this letter, at one point it's the ferry like schedule and timetable. But he's very disorganized, and it's very much the life that Ripley wants to be away from. But interestingly, in this scene, he doesn't take out his fancy pen. He uses the pen that's there at the desk. And it's not something that like we see him make a conscious decision to do. But it's just a little thing where he walks away. In fact, the way the episode tells us this detail is actually really important, because it's not like we get a good look at the pen. So we're not going to recognize the pen, especially in black and white. So it's not like we're seeing a color that we can recognize. As he's walking away from the desk, we find out that he wasn't using his own pen, because this concierge says, "Sir, the pen." And he turns around and has to walk back and put it in the little cup. And it's this beat up old pen that just goes in the cup. And it's an interesting little moment that the episode makes an effort to point out and say, for whatever reason, and thematically I might argue it's because he realizes that this world that he's built for himself is falling apart, and even though he's trying to save it, it maybe doesn't feel real anymore. Maybe he's feeling like he's starting to condition himself to like be his old self again, because this isn't working, because it's starting to all crumble. Maybe that belief's starting to set in, and that's why he doesn't use the fancy pen. I know. Honestly, I was surprised he even used the name Greenleaf when he went to this little hotel. I thought he might try and avoid that. One of the reasons why he goes there, not only because Marge is able to send him a letter because the inspector told her where he was, but also because the press are kind of like tailing him and taking photos and putting him in the newspaper, so he's trying to get away from that as well. That's the thing throughout the episode. There's a fun little sequence. I assumed that was an undercover cop, but it's not until the end of the scene it's revealed that it's actually a reporter from the local newspaper. But that stuff's all solid. And like I said, it really does a great job of like that first moment he sees this hotel room, this second one, and he opens the door and it's this crappy, tiny little room with a single bed. You can hear shouting coming from like a fight from a couple somewhere. It's the contrast between that and the hotel he was in previously. And we've done this before. Like this is again, it's a returning motif. This was back in like episode, was it 4? No, 4 was the one on the boat. So no, I think it was 4. Yeah, 3 was the one on the boat. It was 4 where he tried to be Dickie and go to the big fancy hotel, but then had to sort of like pull away from it. In part because Marge and others could find him. So we've done this dance before of him like getting a taste of this bigger, grander life. This time it hurts probably even more so though, because he felt like he'd done it. He felt like he'd achieved it, like he was really reveling in it. Obviously it wasn't in the apartment he bought or started renting particularly long, because the murder all came up and Freddy kind of ruined that. Things keep cropping up to ruin this perfect lie that he's tried to build for himself. So by the end of the episode, he has made a choice to, retreat. Now, where exactly he's going next? I mean, we know he goes to what'd you call it? Venice, because which it never actually tells us. I don't think he goes to Venice. I'm assuming it's Venice because of all the boats on the water. If I know anything, I'm pretty sure this is Venice. But he is confronted by a local police officer. And he's told that the inspector wants to see him in Rome the next day. And he has to go. There's a ferry tonight to Naples. And he says, yeah, I'll be there. He tries to obviously weasel his way out of it. But of course, they want to know more about this Tom Ripley character that they think is missing. But of course, he actually asked for a timetable for another ferry. So I was surprised they got on the one to Naples. But then he does go to Naples, but then of course he goes to he sneaks into the apartment actually. He waits for the landlady to leave. He's smart enough to wait until she exits the building so he can get in and get his original passport, get his original typewriter that he uses to forge papers and details, get some of the stuff that he wants. And notably, he doesn't take some of the things that he bought for living there. That ashtray he was so happy to get. The camera really emphasizes that as he's leaving. He leaves that behind. Ultimately, it's not the essentials that perhaps he thought it was, or at least he can't accept it as essentials anymore. So I think all of this is handled well, and it leads to the ending where he's in Venice and he smiles at the end as if he's like, okay, I've kind of gotten away from that. It'd probably be quite smart now to stop using Dickie's name, certainly, and the fact that he went and got his old passport, I would think, probably implies that to some extent. But of course the cat's still there in the stairwell, all those little details, those visual touches just to sort of tie it all together. I really like the I was mentioning the concierge at the sort of the crappier hotel, the cheaper hotel. He's kind of, I mean, not only does it point out how cheap it is because he doesn't want to like just add the cost of the stamps to the room bill. He's like, no, cash now, to give you this sort of untrusting dynamic of where this place is. But even just the way he sort of stares at Tom at certain points in the episode with the lighting in his face, it's not like it's not a very harsh like beam of light going down his face where you've got the shadow and the one beam of light going across the eyes. It's not as harsh as that. It's not as obvious as that. It's more subtle, but there does feel like there's maybe a bit of a shadow at the top and bottom of his face a little bit. And at times, like it almost seems like he's enjoying when Ripley looks like he's having a rough time, like Ripley's having to leave, or Ripley's been talking, been spoken to by the police, or whatever. It does almost feel like he kind of represents this idea of I don't know, like some version of comeuppance. Like there's like a little bit of a, like even just the way he's shot as well with this dead on shot. Like, typically when you've got a scene with two characters talking, they'll talk into the empty space, right? They'll do that. But this character is like in the middle and he's staring right at the camera effectively. And it feels very imposing, like he's in your business and you can't get rid of him. Like he's overpowering and like you're just like you're caught in his gaze or whatever. So I'm sure there's some fancy sort of way of like analyzing what this character represents on like a psyche level, but it wasn't lost to me that they were doing something with him and that he kind of represented this judgmental kind of like observation that was coming Ripley's way. But I don't know, it was interesting. It was an interesting touch from a directorial and storytelling standpoint. So other little stylistic touches in this one. Like I said, this one more like because it's less focused in one thing, it's jumping around a lot. Like I said, there's more scenes with the inspector, stuff like that. A little stylish thing they do at one point. Ripley is in the bath and he's trying to like sort of think about how he'll tell Marge that Dickie wants nothing to do with her anymore. He's like, oh, he told me that he wants to break up, and it should be him telling you this. And of course, all I could think as he was saying this is that, like, she will never buy this coming from you at this point. Like, it's been too many times now where she's spoken to you instead of him. That doesn't need to happen, of course, because later on he gets a letter from her that says that she's pissed at him, she's through with him, and she's realised why him and Tom are so close, and she wished she'd known because she wouldn't have wasted a year of her life on him. So I think the implication is she's implying they're gay, which is, whatever, right? But for me, what stood out about this scene was the look of glee on Ripley's face that the Marge problem has finally left. Like, it's finally gone. She's going to stop chasing Dickie. She's finally just taken the hint that she's been dumped. And it can move on. Now, of course, the irony being here that this happens when the inspector has taken an interest in her and is going to make sure she's still in the picture, is going to make sure she's still there to be this thorn in his side. But, it is a moment of joy and relief. And it's funny because, again, it's a nice contrast because the relief on his face when he sees Marge, of her own decision, decide that they're through and that she doesn't want to be around him anymore. But then the next letter he gets is the one from the bank, and then it's like everything comes, tumbling towards him at, Mach 5 or whatever. So, again, good contrast. Anyway, the stylish thing I was getting at, though, is when he's in the bath and he's thinking of this and he's talking and sort of acting out this conversation, he's seeing Dickie, like he's got like a sort of force ghost of Dickie in his head that he's talking to, and then that force ghost turns into Marge, like halfway through the scene. Very interesting touch that they're kind of leading a little bit more into as time goes on. Obviously, we had the sort of the dead Dickie come back, not real, of course, but like come back in his head to the apartment in that previous episode. Here, it's a lot more like he's just having conversations with him and also Marge. They're just having these conversations in his head. And this maybe further points to this idea that he is a bit of a, would it be fair to call him a sociopath, perhaps? Given how he treats people, how he acts around people. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's something there to consider. But super, super stylish. He also sends a letter to the landlady saying that he has to give up the apartment. We don't see her get that letter in the episode, but he does send it. Which I think that's the sign for the audience towards the end that he is going to move on. Like he's realizing that he can't just be Dickie Greenleaf anymore. He has to leave that identity behind, and this is him admitting it. Just at the last possible second, the last time he can really ditch and get away from all this police investigation is when he makes that decision. Because if I do think if he went back to the inspector, there's a possibility he would never have a chance again to run away. Like, not that they'd arrest him immediately, but they'd keep him under tighter surveillance. Maybe they bring in Marge, and all it's going to take is Marge being in the room with them to completely, destroy everything he's built and get him into trouble for this. They're still going to be looking for a Richard Greenleaf, of course, but he will not be traveling under that name. And because this is set in a time period where there's less, photographs of people, less digital images floating around, a lot of what he gets away with, he's able to do because of the time period that he's in, right? At least the ways he does it. I'm sure there's fancy high-tech ways to do a lot of this shit now. I have no doubt. But his method's a bit more old school, I guess you could say. There's a scene early on where once again we get one of Ripley's writing a letter to the parents again. So there's a lot of letter writing and reading in this episode, actually. Which, I think they do these scenes really well, but interestingly, the two episodes that have got the most of them are probably my two least favourite episodes, because they tend to indicate that we're doing a lot of little things, and the letters are a way to sort of like advance the plot, which is fine, but inherently they're not as interesting as, he's trapped in a house with a body that he's just killed and he has to figure out how to get it out. Like, that's just, on a more visceral level, more exciting. But I love this again because he goes on a little bit and tells them, hey, if you've not heard about my friend being murdered, they treat me like I'm a suspect, and it's all very awful. It's a very, very downbeat. He's very kind of sad and melancholic throughout this entire letter. But I laughed audibly at the end of it because at the very, very end, he had to just add on, yeah, the only thing keeping them together is this Tom Ripley. He's a great guy. Like, that's constant, like, having to say that Ripley's a great guy when he's lying about who he is so funny to me. But it's funny, but it's also revealing as a character, right? This idea that he is insecure about who he is, and that's why he wants to steal other people's identities. Aside from the obvious financial benefit that it's bringing, but there's a more deeper, kind of more character focused thing behind it. So, yeah, good episode, but definitely not one of the standouts of the season. But there's a lot of little things that are really smart and sets us up for. Honestly, I'm not really sure. The only thing I know about the finale is that I happen to notice the runtime is a bit longer. It's like 70-something minutes. So we'll see how this wraps up. And knowing that there's more books and that potentially there could be more seasons, I genuinely don't know how this will end. I think if you'd asked me back in the first couple of episodes when I didn't know there was more than one book, I might have said, he's probably going to die at the end. But now, obviously, I don't think that because there's a possibility for more. So I am looking forward to seeing where we go. So, yeah. And performances were great again this episode. I think the inspector's entertaining to watch, which is good because he kind of like, even though he's only come in episode 6 onwards, I think it's important that he's been entertaining to watch because of his role in investigating this murder and he effectively became a main character and has his own plot lines and his own scenes because he's so important to the overall story. It's actually really good that he's entertaining because like if he came in, 2/3 out of the story and he wasn't that compelling, it would probably drag down like half of this episode. But he is quite good. Like watching his gears move, watching him try and interpret the people he's talking to, and yeah, be kind of a dick to certain people is interesting to kind of watch play out. So the performance is good and adds a lot to it. So cool. That's my thoughts on episode 7 of Ripley. I'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with the finale. But that is my thoughts. You can, of course, go over to Patreon. I think I forgot to start this with thanking the Patreon sponsor, which I usually do. It slipped my mind. Thanks to Fletcher for picking this show. He sponsors it, so he gets to pick, and that's why we're here. That's why we're doing Ripley. So you can support everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $3 per month, or you can be a YouTube member if that's more your thing. Any way you choose to support all the content is greatly appreciated. Even a one-time thing is absolutely great. Helps out a bunch, and it's what keeps this being possible. So thank you very much to everyone for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?